The goal of this video is to dive through one of my favorite builds I've played in Diablo 4, and that is the minion-focused Necromancer build. This build is going to play off Frost minions and buffing up your mages to do as much single target damage as possible, and it leads this build into being a bossing build with a focus on group play. We'll talk about why that is later in the build. Check this out. And then watch this. Look at his health. See, I'm doing all poison. Just watch out for the center. Pizza.
Beautiful.
All in. He dies. Let's go!
Holy shit!
World Tier 4 at 59. Let's go! Follow, I appreciate you. So let's walk through the Minion Master build. So I use Decompose. Decompose is essentially going to be a laser beam that you're going to connect with the enemy. I have a legendary right now that connects it to 2 additional targets. The nice thing is every time an enemy dies while being decomposed, you gain essence, which isn't a big deal because you don't really need as much essence on this build. But also you and your minions deal 10% increased damage to those who are being decomposed. So it's nice because the inherent ability of Decompose is it also will drop a corpse every 2.5 seconds. But your minions will do 10% more damage. You ultimately use it as an amplifier to have your minions be doing more damage. That's the whole point of this thing, okay? I have a legendary that chains it to 2 additional targets, so if my minions are hitting any of the other targets, it also does the same, and it can also drop additional corpses. Every time a corpse drops on one, there's a chance they drop on all 3. Moving to my right click, I'm using Blight. Blight is simply there for a slow and because of the passive that we'll get in a second. It's a slow, it does damage over time. I throw it down while my minions are fighting on the bosses and such like that. Blight also slows the enemies by 25, which is always nice, 25%. And you and your minions deal 15% increased damage to enemies with Blight. So there's another 15% increase to the minion damage on those who are standing on that pool. So it's really strong. You're going to go with Hewed Flesh, which gives you a chance with your lucky hit to drop a corpse to the ground. Having corpse on the ground is super strong for this build because you're going to be constantly consuming those corpses to heal up your team. And we'll talk about like how that heal aspect works later on in the build. I use Blood Mist, which is almost a staple in every single Necromancer build. You're going to see this in almost every single build. The only other option you'd have is Bone Prison, if you can play around Bone Prison. I did that a little bit yesterday, and I just think Blood Mist is better for me. I like the ability to be completely invulnerable, and that's what Blood Mist does. You turn into a mist. A lot of you have seen the ability. You tick people for damage, and also the reason I like it is not even because of this overpower ability. That doesn't do much for this build, but the third tick, it fortifies you for every enemy you hit by 0.5 of your base life every time it hits, and it hits 9 times. So if you're hitting a large squad of enemies 9 times, you're fortifying them for almost full fortify just inherently in itself. This build I use Corpse Explosion, but I don't use the standard explosion. I go to Blighted Corpse, which leaves a shadow damage on the ground, which is always strong. It's another DOT while minions are fighting. The whole point of this build is to keep your minions going while you have passive damage ticking as well. So as much damage sources as possible on whatever boss you're fighting. Corpse Explosion radius is increased by 15% as the other passive. On top of that, is where we start speccing into making our warriors stronger. Increase the damage and life of your skeletal warriors by 45% once you max that out. And then here, consuming a corpse generates 6 essence. So you're going to want points into Fueled by Death because it's increased damage after you consume a corpse. I don't have all the skill points from the map yet, so I'll eventually have this filled and some other passives filled, but right now it's not. 6% increased damage after consuming a corpse. You want to increase the damage and life of your skeletal mages. Skeletal mages are the meat and potatoes of this build because they do so much damage and they attack so fast. So the whole point of this build is to buff up these mages as much as humanly possible with anything you can do. And then there's some other passives that you'll see later on that include stuff like standing by the minions will increase their damage by 30%. So you want to stay in the back line with them while your other minions in the front line are drawing away attention. And it shows how strong it is during bossing. You know, you can do some of these passes for shadow damage because you're using Blight and the Shadow Corpse Explosion. I wouldn't worry too much about these. I like the movement speed on Shadow. Let's just add some movement speed. So that's where I'll spec more points into as I go forward. This is really strong. Whenever a corpse is formed by your skills or your minions, fortify for 6% of your base life. So the nice thing is we're going to be using Skeletal Reapers, which have a 15% chance to create a corpse every single time they swing. So a 15% chance to increase to drop a corpse every time they swing. And there's a bunch of them. I think I have 6 of them on this build, constantly swinging. So you're constantly fortifying, keeping you healthy. So now we'll get into the final ultimate tree. I use Army of the Dead, which is an ultimate that just brings back, the nice thing about this ultimate is it brings 1 million minions onto the map that are going to dive onto the enemies and blow up, dealing a fair amount of damage. But the reason we like this build is for some other things that we get from our equipment and from this final node. So they have a 15% chance to leave a corpse, so ultimately you'll get fortified and you'll have more corpses around that you can choose to explode or to consume for damage or to heal your minions as well. But also, Army of the Dead raises your skeletal warriors and mages back immediately. So the nice thing is you let your minions go in there and you know, do what they can do as much damage as possible. If you're ever in a situation where they die, you use Army of the Dead and they're all back, which is really strong. These are the best passives for this build by far, and I'll talk about what they do. So after you've been healthy for 4 seconds, your minions gain 12% attack speed. Being that we're going to always be in the back line, this is going to make it make our minions always have 12% attack speed. We're trying not to get hit like virtually at all, and since we have Fortify over our health, we should stay healthy as a significant portion of the time. Your minions deal 30% increased damage when you're close to them. So you're always going to position yourself right by the mages because they do a bunch of damage. They throw, I clock them getting up to, as you increase attack speed, it'll be even faster. I clock these guys throwing over 2 throws a second, each hitting at this point in my build, like 3,500 plus, around that kind of situation. So the damage per second is insane. The problem is the focus. This is why this build is more for bossing, because if there's only one target, your minions destroy the boss. On top of that, every 5 seconds, when you consume a minion or consume a corpse on the ground, it will heal all of your minions for 60% of their max life. So it's great for tanking, great for keeping people alive, because the longer they're alive, the more damage they'll do. Your minions cannot lose more than 30% of their life from a single instance, which is always great. The only problem with this build is when you run into a heavy poison situation, that's going to be a problem. So you've got to really focus on bringing up those skeletal priests. Priests pop up whenever you generate a minion after your minions are full. So what I'm saying for my build, I have 6 warriors and 5 mages. After they're full, 6 and 5, and I press the create a new corpse, it'll just spawn a priest that'll give everyone 10% damage, all the minions 10% damage for a short amount of time, and heal them. But then also every 5 seconds, it'll heal them for 60% of their HP. So sometimes you're just a medic where you're constantly hitting the heal all minions button. Okay. I choose the passive here that every time you've not taken damage for the last 3 seconds, your minion gain an additional 15% attack speed. And when you have 7 minions at least, which I have over, it's doubled. So 30% attack speed. So that's when those mages are pumping. Okay. Really strong. The Paragon tree, I'm heading down. You know, I went right up through here. I'll just talk quickly about the Paragon tree. You know what? First, before Paragon, I should do my Book of the Dead. So for Book of the Dead, for Skeletal Warriors, I'm using Reapers because they can generate those corpses. Corpses are amazing for this build. You know, they fortify you. They give you option to either create more minions, heal your minions, or explode them with Corpse Explosion. Your mages, I'm rocking with cold, and I'll explain that when we get to the equipment, but the cold is so good for skeletal mages when you get a certain piece of equipment. Every time your cold mages damage an enemy with their primary attack, you gain 2 essence, so you're constantly maxed on essence, which is great if you get some items that say when you have large essence, you do more damage. And then there's also items that if you're stationary, some aspects, if you're stationary, you do more damage. So the fact that you could be stationary in the back line on top of your mages, and constantly having full mana because of them, or essence because of them throwing with their ice, you get both those buffs inherently, which just more damage for them. Some of the stuff isn't optimized in my build yet, but this is the path I was heading down, and it just feels really good in the bossing front. I choose to get rid of golems, and I make it so I have 10% increased attack speed. That's just what I'm rocking with. There's a case you can be made to have 10% increased life when you get into tier 4. But I wouldn't use this build in tier 4 unless you have a team that's decent at mobbing. This build is not great at mobbing in tier 4. It's still great at bossing in tier 4. And that's proven by the fact that we got through the second capstone, the tier 4 capstone at level 59 with the boys, just because they were great at the mobbing. And honestly, these minions being on top of the boss and soaking a lot of the AoE attacks was super beneficial for us as a team. Allowed us to revive our teammates and also just kept damage on top of the boss while we were juking the attacks. The Paragon tree. So I got lucky with these glyphs. You're going to want to look for glyphs like this. This glyph, 58.1% mage skeletal damage. And then they increase their resistances to by 25%. This just makes them really hit hard. All you need to do to succeed with this is get 40 intelligence here. I could actually take some intelligence off of these points and move forward. And then I went right into the summoning tree because there's a cult leader pass that your minions deal 15% increased damage for each minion type you have active. So 30% increased damage once I get to that node. But I chose to start with the glyph placement section first because I had another strong glyph socket that I obtained doing some of the nightmare dungeons, which is 25.3% damage to crowd controlled enemies. You and your minions deal 10% increased damage to slowed or chilled enemies and 20% increased damage to frozen enemies. So this is where I was talking about using those cold mages. This is where it kind of synergizes well, and with an awesome aspect that you get which is we'll get into aspects right now, but this is roughly kind of the situation I was going for. There are other paths I'd head down after, maybe the shadow path, because I'm using a lot of shadow damage over time abilities while my mages are fighting, or while my mages and warriors are fighting. So some of the legendaries I was using include things like increase your skeletal warriors by 2, increase your skeletal mages by 2. Your skeletons gain 30% increased damage while they're alive for 10 seconds, so that's why you're constantly trying to heal them. Every 10 this is an awesome ability. Ready? I got this in tier 4, and I have it a couple times in tier 3, but in tier 4 it really shows the damage. Every 10 seconds, each of your skeletal mages will cast a blizzard that does 1300 cold damage and continuously chills enemies for 8% over 6 seconds. So the skeletal mages will constantly be unloading, and then inherently you'll just see snow clouds raining down on enemies, freezing them everywhere, which works with that synergy of doing more damage to frozen enemies or crowd controlled enemies. So that's why it really messes up mobs. It's really good for the elites in situations where I'm able to constantly keep them frozen. I'm using this Sacred Unique because it's just awesome. Your darkness skills chill enemies as well. So my whole build, I've been focused on making it a cold build. This isn't necessary by any means, but it makes it so all your darkness skills chill enemies as well. So that's why I use that corpse explosion and change it to the darkness ability rather than the explosion, because more darkness on the ground, the more chilled they are, the more options they get frozen, which synergizes with doing more damage to frozen enemies that I have in the Paragon tree. So that's kind of how this works out. Each time one of your minions damaged an enemy, they gain 20% attack speed up to 60%, 59%, which helps with the mages. Like I said in the backline, everything's to help them. Decompose can chain up to 2 additional targets. That's the one thing I was talking about during the build. So when it spawns a corpse, it has a chance to spawn a corpse on all those additional targets as well. So I'm going to stand back with the mages where they're at, hit shift, aim, and just hold decompose. So it does 10% minion damage to everybody after I throw a couple blights at their feet. That'll do 15% minion damage to whoever's on the blights. And then I'm constantly holding this, chaining 3 enemies. So wherever they're doing damage to has an additional 10% damage taken by them. Okay, the final thing, when Army, this is why, another reason why Army of the Dead is amazing. Whenever Army of the Dead is active, minions gain 70% attack speed and take 90% reduced damage. So you don't have to worry about healing them at all while it's active, and everybody is absolutely unloading with damage during this time. I only have it at 70, but I have an ability here. I have an aspect that allows for 90% increased attack speed. These mages do unbelievable damage during that period on bosses. It's absolutely insane what they can do with that damage. So that's the meat and potatoes of the whole build. So to summarize, this build is insanely fun to play. It feels very necromancer-y. It has no issues in World Tier 3 at all. It's unbelievably strong against bossing, but it does slightly struggle when you get to World Tier 4, just in that the elites separate the focus in the minions and leave you vulnerable. I see this being a way better build for groups and less so for single players. I think this build is so much fun. If you're looking to have some more fun on a Necromancer, check this thing out. Thank you so much for sticking around today and watching this video. Hit that subscribe button. Come on over to the Twitch and hit the follow button. I'm going to be on vacation this week in California, but I will be back home next week, ready to rock and roll. Thanks for being here, and see you soon.